All right. Chapter 6 Content Machine. Everyone wants to know how someone got started in their career. But that's really the most interesting part. How about when will it be over? The obsession, the addiction, the quiet panic that follows when the views dip. I was more infamous than famous, but I still felt it all. Andy Warhol once wrote that everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame. For a lucky few, or an unlucky few, depending on who you ask, that fleeting moment turns into a career. Somehow, I became one of them. Turning my viral feminist clips into a full-blown media job wasn't the result of a grand plan or strategic brilliance. It was more like a stumble, a slip, a trip, and a fall, mixed with a ridiculous amount of hard work and sleepless nights. But let's be honest, it takes serious effort to get as thoroughly cancelled as I did. Given that Rebel's audience couldn't get enough of my slut-walk confrontations, Urza began flying me out to Toronto once a month to film a paywatch show. It was called Standoff. Of course, because apparently every right-wing show has to be named like an energy drink or a WWE match. We walked out of a shabby, half-forgotten building in Vaughan on the outskirts of Toronto. The neighborhood was rough, cracked sidewalks, broken glass in the gutters, an indigenous men's homeless shelter across the street. Inside was plain and sterile, old carpet, bright fluorescent lighting that made it feel like a doctor's office, and a handful of folding picnic tables with laptops scattered around them. Urza was never one for aesthetics or atmosphere. He ran things like a machine, fast, functional, and focused on output. Human comfort was more of an afterthought. The crown jewel of the office was a wildly overpriced studio room, outfitted with a green screen and a single desk. Space was so limited, the studio doubled as the meeting space, so strategy sessions often unfolded like we were filming a segment. And yet, I liked it. It felt honest. Asking for donations made sense when everything around us was still being built. We embraced that growth, marking it with paper bricks taped to the walls, each one printed with the name of a supporter or donor. A testament to being a company built by the people for the people. At this point in my life, I was almost comically broke. My videos were going viral, pulling in millions of views back when political content was still fully monetized, before the so-called apocalypse. But I didn't see a dime of it. In fact, I was paying out of pocket to cover the cost of my own video editor. To their credit, Rebel did cover my flights to Toronto, eventually offered a small stipend for my monthly show, but it still didn't cover my expenses. Early on, I had to arrange my own accommodations whenever I flew in. After one look at my empty bank account, I downloaded couch surfing and stayed on strangers' floors. Sometimes I spring for a sketchy $35 Airbnb, bed bug infested couches and all. I had no clothes to speak of, just my best $15 black tank top and a pair of jeans without a belt. Eventually, Urza noticed and gave me a small budget to buy dresses. He sent me shopping with Faith Goldie, a commentator a few years older than me who'd work at Sun News. I admire her. She was sharp and funny, but she often looked at me like I was a lost puppy. A mutual colleague once said she privately described me as well-meaning, but stupid. I don't know if that's true, but at the time it wouldn't have been far off. I was 20, what can I say? But I digress. I was regularly flying from Vancouver to Toronto on Rebel's dime, squeezing trips between work shifts and college classes. With another visit coming up, I wanted to make the most of my time in person with Urza. I had a pitch in mind, a more significant project covering the refugee crisis in Europe. It was early 2016. Headlines were dominated by the surge of migrants fleeing the Syrian war, pouring through Europe's porous borders. Online, the discourse was heating up. Security concerns, cultural tensions, camps full of young, displaced men with nowhere to go. I wanted the chance to be a real journalist, not just someone turning out viral clickbait. The problem was, I was a first-year university student with no real understanding of business, let alone the media industry. When I finally pitched the idea to Urza in our little green screen office, I was practically negotiating to work for free. I had no sense of the value I was bringing to the company. He was skeptical at first, mostly due to security concerns. To be honest, I couldn't tell whether he was genuinely worried about my safety or just calculating the legal risk of sending a 20-year-old girl into extremist hot spots like Molenbeek. Either way, I appreciate that he wouldn't let me go without some level of protection. In the end, he agreed. Rebel will cover the flights and security, and everything else will be on me. I did the math in my head, though who was I kidding? There was no math to do. I had $0. But I said yes anyway. Fuck it, I'll make it work. I flew home to get my affairs in order. The first thing on my list, telling my boss I'd be taking the next few months off. That night, the casino where I worked as a cocktail waitress was packed. The UFC fight nights always brought good tips, but I was growing disillusioned. At the bottom of the casino caste system, I was relegated to soul-crushing graveyard shifts in the beer tank, where my main task was popping Heineken caps for toonies. On one especially slow night, my floor manager, a sharp, striking Asian woman in a pencil skirt, pulled me aside to offer some unsolicited advice. My top didn't show enough cleavage. I stood there, bottle opener in hand, wondering if this was really what my life had been reduced to. Cutting my shirt lower just to keep up with inflation? Learning advanced techniques in racial and social profiling just to predict who tipped best. Strategically, scheduling shifts around busy welfare Wednesdays. I'd finally started working my way up to the more lucrative floor jobs on fight nights, and my boss seemed generally confused that I was willing to risk it all for some grand mission to Europe. But he could tell I wasn't going to be talked out of it, so he approved the leave. The truth was, I didn't know if I'd ever be back, and I didn't particularly care. I had a videographer and editor in Vancouver who agreed to join me on the trip, helping me cover hotel fees, car rentals, food, and whatever else we needed. He was a true video savant, someone who had first approached me at a protest, offering to help. Back then, if you wanted to get involved in politics, you took whatever chance you could, purely out of passion. More often than not, you were losing money. He was just as eager for the venture as I was. We flew to Europe in the summer of 2016. I can't remember where we landed first, but we ended up publishing videos across Germany, the UK, Belgium, and France. Searching for Syrian refugees in France's Calais jungle, 184,000 views. I thought I was in Germany. Turkey, 390,000 views. Why Lauren Southern needed security to walk through Molenbeek, Belgium, 1.3 million views. Attacked by anti-fascist thugs in London, 2.3 million views. These videos were created with grit and a touch of madness. I spent my 21st birthday in a Muslim-owned smoking bar in Molenbeek during Ramadan, crashing at a rundown hostel while my videographer and I stressed over our dwindling funds. Meanwhile, he was still recovering from the near-death experiences I put us through in Germany, like the time I accidentally turned onto the main tracks in the middle of the road. I wasn't used to cities where trolleys share space with traffic. Welcome to Europe. Yet despite the chaos, we were producing some of the most watched political content on the internet at the time. A major reason the videos took off was Rebel Media's audience, who saw our actions as incredibly brave. I've gone back and scrolled through the comments and old clips just to understand what was being pumped into my brain every other second. One conservative girl has more balls than the entire Liberal Party. Thank you for putting your life on the line for truth. Lauren's a genius. This is the first younger woman who I have ever truly respected. Okay, what the hell? Thousands of comments, each with thousands of likes. Among the praise were timestamps and crude remarks, highlighting moments when the camera briefly caught my hips. If I ever turn around to speak to someone, people would screenshot my butt and post it on forums. The sheer volume of it all, constant, inescapable, began to warp my mind in ways that are impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't lived through it. The truth is, I wasn't brave. I lacked fear because I didn't fully understand the risk. Stupidity and bravery are often confused. Looking back, I think what kept me safe was how brazen I appeared. I cheerfully strolled into migrant camps like the Calais jungle, where men spoke of beatings and stabbings, places so volatile that even local police kept their distance. I then asked questions no one else would dare voice, even from behind bulletproof glass, just because of the social consequences alone. Are there any terrorists here? What do you think about women? Do you support Sharia law? I wandered through the crowds of unmoored migrants with nothing to lose, listening to stories of violence and chaos. I can only imagine what they thought as they watched my bleached blonde 20-year-old self show up alone. Surely they must have assumed I had backup. Surely no one was stupid enough to do this unprotected. I carried myself like I was flanked by a heavily armed crew. When I published these videos, some progressive critics took issue with my use of the term no-go zone. But the reality was that many of these camps weren't policed at all. Even migrants themselves often expressed frustration and fear. The danger didn't end when they fled their countries. It followed them, often in the form of the very people they tried to escape. Even after learning all this, it barely registered. I kept going. I was too caught up in the rush. In the version of the story I was living in my head, death was always teased but never actually possible. That wasn't how the script went. When I returned from Europe, my hopes were realized. I was offered a full-time job with Rebel News. I packed my bags and moved across the country to Toronto in mid-2016, straight out of my childhood bedroom at mom and dad's place. I was making 65,000 CAD. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, yet reality hit me hard when I discovered the true cost of moving out. The expenses were staggering. I learned all about white privilege in school, but budgeting? That was the lesson we all missed. Eventually, I moved into a tiny shoebox apartment overlooking the Drake on Lisgar Street, paying about 1.5k a month. Today, that same unit goes for 2.5k. I couldn't even afford a bed frame, so I slept on a mattress on the floor. My meals were usually microwave dishes from the work bistro. Despite that, I admire my time in Toronto. I was on an unending high, and everything seemed to be going up. I made friends in the city that I met on political Facebook groups. We went shooting, partied, hit up bars, and even got into largely entertaining verbal street fights over politics. People would recognize me, but life was so different then. They were more respectful. I hadn't accumulated any dirt on the internet yet. I was a fresh face with a new fame. The hardest part of that time, the fire alarms in my building. They were absurdly sensitive. I had 2 pet hedgehogs, and at least once every 2 weeks, an alarm would go off at 5 a.m., forcing me to drag 2 hissing, spiking little creatures down the freezing Toronto stairwell and stand out in the snow under the fire department until the fire department cleared the code. Once I settled, or at least wedged my mattress into a corner, I threw myself into work. My entire life became an obsessive pursuit of tracking both local and world events, trying to figure out which story I could amplify online next. One afternoon, while I was scrolling through Facebook at the office, I stumbled on a post about a protest plan at the University of Toronto. A local professor was being cancelled by students for refusing to use mandated transgender pronouns. The protest was scheduled for the next day, just a 30-minute Uber ride from the office, and it looked promising. I didn't expect much, but my videographer and I decided to go. Camera batteries charged, mics packed, we set off, unsure of what word we were walking into. We filmed interviews with protesters, counter-protesters, and the professor at the center of it all. At the time, Jordan Peterson was a relatively unknown psychology lecturer with a sharp way of speaking and a quiet intensity. We knew the filming was solid, but I was shocked when I saw the numbers pouring in. The footage went viral, calm but urgent. He pleaded with students to consider his perspective as they shouted him down. One even lunged at me, clawing for my microphone. The video racked up millions of views. It was a spark in the powder keg, one of the first viral moments that helped launch Jordan Peterson from obscure professor to national lightning rod. I don't claim credit for his rise. I'm sure he would have found prominence without my early reports. But looking back, it's hard not to notice how the strange, fleeting moments I brushed against have branched into entire universes of their own. Beyond my personal world moving onward and upward, this was also the era when Trump won the 2016 election. In the first week of November, Urza sent Faith Goldie and me on the bizarre assignment to India to cover a UN health conference on tobacco and nicotine. I remember sitting on that 17-hour flight, thrilled to be seeing India for the first time, but also deeply confused about why I was being flown across the world to weigh in on flavored nicotine. We went from panel to panel, listening to experts talk about tobacco, menthols, and strategies to reduce cigarette use, while chasing down Canadian political reps and trying to harass them on camera. I mean, hell, I love a good menthol cigarette myself, but I didn't know the first thing about tobacco policy or public health. Why was I even there? We spent US election night in a hotel in Delhi. Watching the results come in together, it made no sense. Back home, the most important political event of the decade was unfolding, and Rebel had sent their 2 main on-camera reporters to make low-engagement content about cigarette regulations. If more people had been paying attention to the reporting, rather than commenting on how cute Faith and I looked, they might have noticed something I only began to piece together later. I can't say anything definitively, but the whole assignment raised red flags. The content made no editorial sense. For context, I couldn't get reimbursed for hotel stays on high-performing stores in Europe, but for this trip, we were flown across the world, put up in a 5-star hotel, and asked to generate content that barely reached 10,000 views. It left me wondering if someone outside the company had a vested interest in us being there. After we returned, I remember sitting beside Faith as she vented about being pushed to produce even more content on tobacco, including a mini documentary. By that point, things were blatantly off. No one had shown much interest in the videos, yet we were being nudged to double down. I wasn't in any place to start pulling at the threads though. I was just excited to be traveling and hadn't fully grasped how decisions were being made behind the scenes. Even though I missed the election, I begged Rebo to let me attend Trump's inauguration. It was like pulling teeth. Despite being one of the most significant political events of 2017, complete with mass protests, my confusion over the India trip only deepened. After countless follow-ups, I finally landed the assignment and arrived in Washington, D.C. on the day before Trump's first inauguration. Almost immediately, I was caught in the middle of one of the largest riots I've ever witnessed. Antifa, a loose network of far-left activists known for protests, violence, and vandalism, had taken to the streets. Unlike the events of January 6th, this chaos barely registered in the national media, perhaps because the destruction was directed at private businesses, not government buildings. Say what you will about the right-wing protesters, but at least they seemed to understand their target. Standing amidst the massive black bloc crowd as they smashed car windows and tore through Starbucks glass walls was electrifying. After finding the group, I paused to speak to the camera, only to notice a swarm of police officers behind us waving batons and closing in fast. I had to break into a jog, narrowly dodging the swinging batons as the scene erupted around me. I witnessed people being trampled and gravely injured, cars ablaze, and officers being struck with bricks. Soon, the entire crowd was corralled into a trap set by another line of police, a tactic known as kettling, used for riot control. Those caught between the two police lines faced arrest, though pressing charges would be difficult given the presence of numerous NGO-funded legal representatives for the protesters. While many received activist legal support, I, as a Canadian, would not have been afforded the same protection. The most terrifying part was being trapped in a narrow shop doorway, surrounded by an increasingly hostile group of masked vigilantes. As the police unleashed pepper spray, I felt on the brink of suffocation. My security acted quickly, falsely spreading the word that I was pregnant as I struggled on the ground and eventually managed to pull me through the crowd, past a reluctant police blockade. I loved riots, absolutely loved them. There was rarely a time I had more fun than during a riot. The irony wasn't lost on me. The alleged conservative revolutionary, secretly addicted to the chaos. I would report on the rioters, casting them as destroyers of civilization, all the while understanding on a deeper level the very thrill that had driven them there. They were motivated by the same rebellious streak I'd had as a teenager, the urge to tear down a world that felt indifferent, even hostile. In another life, perhaps we might have switched places. In this life, I was slinking out of the kettle, while 234 of them were arrested and faced felony charges. After washing the smell of mace and chaos off myself, I then slipped into a dress to attend Trump's inaugural Freedom Ball with a campaign staffer. I watched as Trump and Melania swayed to Frank Sinatra before heading out to drink with a crowd of political strategists at the Trump International. I also made an appearance at the Deplora Ball, mingling with some of the most prominent or maybe just infamous figures in the American right-wing sphere. As you may imagine, based on that name, it was a ridiculous night. I know many of my critics believed I was a fascist, that everything I did during that time was part of some grand sinister vision, but I challenged them to consider another perspective. Maybe the reality was that this kind of surrealism was just exhilarating for a 21-year-old to be part of, and not just me. There were plenty of other young people in the mix who found the zeitgeist of it all thrilling. The politics were more of an afterthought, a fashion statement, or a rebellious fuck you to the people in charge at the time. There's a thrill in being adored, but an even greater rush in being intensely disliked by those you don't respect. That was one of the ironies of the right-wing scene in 2016. While constantly portraying the left as perpetual victims, the right's popularity was largely fueled by its own sense of victimhood. Anytime you were attacked or targeted, your online profile would soar. Right-wing influencers craved those confrontations, knowing they'd draw attention. There were even viral videos where the attackers had been paid, though that was rarely known. In my personal experience, you didn't need to pay anyone. There were more than enough people who genuinely believed they were fighting fascism by attacking dorks with YouTube channels. As this trend grew, many rising media figures sought out protests specifically to provoke reactions and boost their profiles. I was no exception. You can find videos of me shouting absurd things just to rile people up, often until they swung at me, usually in vain. Every time some disgruntled Antifa member went out to defeat fascism with a fist, they unwittingly laid another brick in what would become a massive enterprise of right-wing media influencers. It didn't even need to be a fist. Any moment of genuine confusion or inability to defend your ideas was enough to set you up for failure. One clip from the Deplora Ball, which quickly went viral, over 3 million views, showed a protester screaming at me for attending a fascist event, but as she ranted, she referred to me as a woman. At the time, I had just legally changed my gender in Canada as a joke. Lauren becomes a man, 2.1 million views. I was determined to push people's buttons with that fact. My blue dress, high heels, and bleached blonde hair flowing down, I looked straight at her and said, I'm a man. I didn't expect her to take the bait, but she did, apologizing earnestly for calling me a woman. The silliness of it all spoke for itself, and the internet couldn't get enough. People edited and reposted the video on Twitter and Facebook. This was before TikTok or Instagram Reels, before endless scrolling turned videos into disposable background noise. When something went viral back then, it meant people had actually watched it, clicked on it, sat through it, maybe even shared it. View counts weren't inflated by autoplay or passive swipes. They meant something. I was exhilarated. The whole experience was a whirlwind, and online, a kind of myth began to take shape around me. While most viewers just subscribed to Rebel Media and left positive comments, a more dedicated faction of politically invested followers started posting thousands of photos and illustrations, some showing me as Joanne of Arc, others portraying me in equally dramatic, heroic fashion. More radical corners of the internet took it further, obsessing over my looks and proposing I get married and raise an army of Aryan soldiers. Cartoons appearing casting me as the nurse of a disillusioned millennial Nazi, trying to save a crumbling world. If that sounds absurd or obscure, you have to understand I saw all of it. People tweeted, messaged, and emailed me every post, every meme, every mention. How could I not indulge? I hadn't yet realized that my phone screen wasn't just a one-way looking glass. It stared back at me. Everything I read started to shape how I felt about myself and influenced the choices I made. The sense of who I was began to blur. I wasn't a Nazi, though. I can't deny that the constant stream of internet messages praising me for embodying that identity created a disorienting dreamlike state around the concept. Nazism became less of a historical reality and more of an abstract movie-like aesthetic and joke. If that sounds disturbing, keep in mind it wasn't just the right wing that warped my perception, it was the entire discourse surrounding the term. It was used so frivolously that I felt compelled to strip it of any serious connotations for the sake of my own mental health. The mainstream media and the protesters who threw eggs at me outside the deplorable all called me a Nazi. But for what exactly? Seriously, for what? I don't disagree that some of my protest videos were distasteful, even offensive, and there are things that wouldn't produce today. But I'm pretty sure people didn't dislike the Nazis simply because they were a bit distasteful or offensive. There were, after all, far graver reasons. So either the word Nazi had become a joke to everyone, or these people genuinely believed I was a genocidal maniac. The former seemed more plausible. I have spoken recently with friends who were part of the edgier online scene in their youth, but eventually grew out of it. One friend and I were reminiscing about the way we used to turn everything into a joke. Every mass murder in history, every form of oppression, taking anything too seriously meant risking ridicule, being branded as some kind of stuck-up loser. The great irony, of course, was that so much of our politics centered around lamenting the loss of meaning in the Western world, even as we stripped every major historical event and tradition of its gravity ourselves, reducing everything to punchlines. Alright, now wait a minute. Let me pause right here real quick. Because I remember she talked about before in her English class in the university how the professor wanted to, remember? The professor wanted to decolonize language. That was her English professor. They want to decolonize the English language by purposefully misspelling words wrong, stuff like that. Now, wouldn't Antifa and these far left people be doing the same thing when they're trying to strip down the meaning of certain words? Because as Lauren just said, she even like basically these words don't really mean anything anymore. Like fascism, like, oh, you call me a fascist, but what does it mean? Just telling a weird joke, that's it. And then they don't care anymore, right? And they say, and then like they act that way. But you ever wonder if that's what their purpose was in the first place? So now you have a whole bunch of people like, oh, I'm fascist, I don't care. Oh, I'm racist, I don't give a crap. Oh, you call me sexist, yeah, so what? Like now, because obviously we have who actually starts believing and calling someone, oh, you're this, you're that, unless it's like forced upon you, right? It's not natural. So then, if this is their goal, that means they've accomplished it, didn't they? To like, get rid of the meaning behind words. But why would they do that though? Is it to make people like worse and turn against each other? Is that what the Marxist thing wanted to do? I don't know. That's my guess. Because now you can people get pulled to both extremes, right? Once you get pulled to both extremes, obviously they're gonna hate each other, and then the people are gonna not have they don't like each other anymore. Basically, you cause chaos and disharmony. All right. Anyways, speaking of punchlines, when I returned to Toronto, I walked into a corner store and saw my face plastered on the cover of a political gossip rag. My head had been edited onto the body of a large-breasted woman in an SS uniform, complete with a matching hat. The cover read, She-Wolf of the SS. What was I supposed to do but laugh? What would you have done in my place? I took a copy home and set it on my coffee table for guests to see. You all want me to be a Nazi? Fine, I'll play along. Not like it's anything more than a joke to you anyway. I never pushed back against my more radical audience members because I couldn't discern where the line was anymore, between reality and the bizarre surreality in which blonde girls making stupid videos were somehow equated to Nazism, both by fans and critics alike. On a deeper, perhaps more unsettling level, I have to admit I liked the tension all the same. This was the brief period of my life where I enjoyed fame because I didn't understand it yet. While I coped with a lot of this by convincing myself it was just fringe, it wasn't. I met normal people and even celebrities who had seen these things. Oh yeah, I watched that Nazi cartoon about you. I'd have random people blur out online memes about me while I was picking up takeout. I was starting to get recognized in public more often on the streets of Toronto. It felt bizarre to receive messages and emails from figures I had looked up to as a kid, asking to hang out. Politicians were requesting that I attend fundraising diners. I even got prison letters from mass shooters, no joke. What the fuck? Though they committed their crimes when I was just a toddler, so I take no blame for those. Honestly, writing this chapter had been a struggle. I sent a voice note to a friend who is an author, asking for advice on how to handle chapters like this. Chapters that just recount events of my history in a matter-of-fact way. His response. The fact that these things are born to you suggests either A, that they weren't all that relevant to how Lauren Southern created herself, or B, that you have trouble engaging with the emotions around them because they're too raw. I think it's neither. I think I have trouble engaging with the emotions of this time because they hardly existed. I was not living my own life. I hardly had an internal life. I mean, I did deep down, but it was suffocating. I was completely overwhelmed by the outlandish nature of the experience living for other people, not even the ones I knew in real life. Ooh, alright, and that's chapter 6. And now for chapter 7. Meeting your heroes. The UN Tobacco Conference had triggered internal alarm bells about rebel media as a whole. Actually, let me drink something real quick. I'm thirsty. Shit, this crap. My throat is so dry. Y'all want? Fuck. Come on, get in, bro. Get in. Alright, come on, let me just get this in. Like that. And then wrap it back. Right. Come on. Don't fail me. Alright. Y'all wanna hear me drink? Alright. Let's continue reading to chapter 7. Okay. Chapter 7. Meeting your heroes. The UN Tobacco Conference had triggered internal alarm bells about rebel media as a whole. A more experienced version of me might have seen the red flags, accepted the reality, or quietly looked for a way out. But I wasn't that person yet. I was still naive enough to think that I could get to the bottom of things by asking questions. Many around me already knew what was going on and were baffled by my confusion. It started with something small. Where are all these petitions going? I made a video about radical ideals and Canadian textbooks and was told to direct viewers to a petition. When I asked where it would be delivered, I was met with blank stares. Looking back, the message was obvious. We were using these petitions to build email lists which were then monetized through sponsored blast and promotional campaigns. I probably knew it too, deep down, but didn't want to admit it. I was still hoping for a better explanation, anything that would make it sit right. At that point, getting fired felt more honest than going along with something I couldn't trust. Damn, bro. Damn. Direction in life, huh? That was a big soul-sucking moment. I'd already been reprimanded a few times for my lack of understanding of the media and business world, and each scolding dimmed my enthusiasm and made my truth-telling mission feel a little less genuine. All of this came to a head when I was invited on a trip to Israel. It was pitched as an all-inclusive paid vacation for the staff, with the added bonus of doing some reports while we were there. I was excited. I'd always wanted to visit Israel and see these magnificent, significant holy sites for myself. The problem arose when our team was asked to fundraise for the trip, not just fundraise, but to frame it as a fact-finding mission to our audience. The first thing that struck me was the inconsistency, bro. They call it fact-finding mission. It's like the corporate world way of just wording stuff. They have their own language. I was fairly certain the trip costs were already being covered, and anyone with even a passing understanding of the media industry knows that as a journalist, you don't pay for trips to places like Israel. I have a dozen contacts on my phone right now who could get me a first-class ticket to Israel, all expenses paid, as long as I brought a camera and took a few selfies with a thumbs up. This kind of situation isn't unique to Israel. Of course, they just figured it out earlier than many other countries that have since jumped on the new media bandwagon. The number of influencers funded by Russia, Iran, China, Qatar, and even the United States government is staggering. I confirmed with a senior team member that part of the trip was funded by outside sources. An itinerary made it clear that this fact-finding mission was anything but spontaneous. Every interview was prearranged, every moment scheduled. Our guide, a former IDF paratrooper with 2 decades of service, now leads international tours promoting Israeli political narratives. The experience felt less like journalism, more like a strategic briefing. I wasn't interested in making moral judgments about government PR efforts, they're expectedly. But I did take issue with being asked to raise money from our audience under the guise of grassroots reporting. It didn't feel honest. I didn't flat out decline the trip. I asked Urza and Rebel management if I could fundraise for Rebel in general instead. I didn't want to be caught in a lie or misrepresent the situation. I thought I was being reasonable, but looking back, this wasn't the first time I had pushed back against clear business objectives at Rebel. If it hadn't been the Israel trip, it would have been another story. I suspect it was funded by lobbyists. If it hadn't been those stories, I would have again questioned where the petitions were really going. And so, I was fired. There's no easy way to put it. They didn't even give me an official reason. There was no need to. I finally figured it out. The bright eyes were dark. The bushy tail had shriveled. This was the world of right-wing media I had once admired. These were my heroes, the champions of freedom and truth. But I had misunderstood everything. Truth wasn't the primary goal. It was just an occasional byproduct of making money. It was my first real lesson in politics. Damn. Really? So money-oriented world now, huh? Let me check something real quick. Okay. Alright. Let's keep going. I met with commentator Gavin McInnes at a bar on Queen Street in Toronto shortly after he'd flown out for the Israel trip. He was furious about the whole experience in his own comically dramatic way. He said Urza practically had to drag him onto the plane, kicking and screaming, that he even tried claiming he lost his passport to get out of it. The sheer laughter over the predicament made me feel a little better. It wasn't like everyone there didn't know exactly what happened. They did. Before any of this unfolded, I thought about going independent a few times. I wondered if I could really make it on my own. Urza often reminded me how tough it would be without Rebel. The cost of travel, the logistics, the support of a camera crew, The message was unmistakable. I should consider myself lucky to be there at all, and I should understand that stepping out of line could mean the end of the road. It seemed like I was about to find out whether that was truly the case. I packed my things into a small box and carried it out of the office, moving slowly, a scene I had watched a million times in the movies. I was tempted to pull a Jerry Maguire-style meltdown on the way out, but thought better of it. Many of my coworkers didn't make eye contact, some waved a quiet goodbye. There really were some great people there. I understood their reactions. It was an intimidating environment. I sat on the curb outside, waiting for my Uber, trying to imagine what came next. David Menzies, one of the more kind-hearted souls at the office, wandered out on his own to say a proper goodbye. He gave me a look that was both knowing and warm, like he understood the stand I had taken, like he wished things had turned out differently. It reassured me that maybe everything would be okay. It's not the whole world against me, and there's still much good in it, even in Rebel. I wasn't ready to tell anyone I had been fired, but I started making videos for my small Lisgar apartment for my own channel, taking my first steps as an independent creator. One of my first videos, Why We'll Forget About London, explored a recent terrorist attack and my belief that the media was trying to downplay it. It garnered 650k views. I might not have had much money, but I felt a spark of certainty. Things were going to be okay. People watched me on my own channel. All the talk about how I'd fail without Rebel had just been noise. I soon signed with a multi-channel network, which offered me a $10,000 signing bonus to help fund my new independent career. This opened doors, and I started traveling the world, collaborating with a variety of influential figures, including a young Tim Pool, who had recently left Vice Media, and some of his more liberal journalistic friends. Live stream riots became one of my favorite types of content. There was something electrifying about being at the heart of a moment where debate had ended, and physical violence took over as a raw expression of ideology. Talk was over. Fists replaced comebacks, with bricks flying overhead, explosions cracking around me, dodging pepper spray, and watching police vehicles go up in flames from Molotov cocktails. It felt like the pinnacle, the end, where all of politics eventually led. I remember meeting with right-wing activists across Europe. One group of friends showed me security footage from outside their offices, documenting attacks by rival groups. They cracked the doors just enough to spray mace on their assailants, who would flail and scream as they retreated into the night. It was both bizarre and fascinating to witness from the silence the dramatic spectacle, but what stood out most was the passion behind it all. While the little cobblestone streets looked like scenes from Emily in Paris, and the day-to-day lives and of the town, I can't talk, bro. What's wrong with me? Of the townsfolk, major ideological and ethno-cultural wars were still being fought. The ideas they were fighting for gave them a sense of purpose, a reason to unite, and a cause to champion. They called themselves identitarians, believing they had a history and community worth preserving. I had once written an article trying to define a Canadian identity, but it felt hollow, a jumbled collection of historical references to a country I barely understood. It was a desperate attempt to grasp at something I longed for, a sense of history, of family, of roots, and traditions. But the truth was, my family had lost theirs, and Canada didn't offer anything in place of it. Beyond the written laws that bind the country together, there was no real theme, no shared heritage that tied the citizens together. It's places like Vancouver or Surrey where I grew up. The immigrant experience was so dominant that even a surface-level cultural identity felt absent. Just fragments of different worlds trying to coexist. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something I needed but would never truly have. I almost tried to experience it by proxy, following these foreign activists, hoping their sense of purpose might rub off on me. A spark never caught. I remained a detached observer, never fully rooted or connected to the activism surrounding me. The European activists could sense that distance, and it left me feeling exposed. The sincerity made me question my own values. Okay. Whether left or right, they seemed deeply skeptical of North American political discourse, and who can blame them? Even if unspoken, I knew they saw us as outsiders, distilling their struggles into simplified, sensationalized stories. Their conflict was our content, and I was never truly part of it. Not fully understanding the world I had entered was more than just an oversight, though it had become dangerous. Photographers often stuck together at protests, sharing tips and watching one another's backs. I first met a photographer named Mark at a riot in the suburbs of Paris in early 2017. Like me, he was covering protests across Europe. Later that year, we ran into each other again at the G20 Welcome to Hell protest in Hamburg, Germany. But this time, following the unspoken grouping protocol had the opposite effect of safety. Mark was chased down and physically beaten by black bloc rioters. His only crime, appearing in a photo with me, taken and shared by left-wing activists. At that point, my reputation had spread beyond North America, but I don't think they even recognized me at first, not until later. I've been wearing a shirt with a logo from a right-wing activist group, a gift from someone I'd interviewed. I knew it was controversial. I didn't realize it was track people down and assault them controversial, let alone people just walking near me. The image kept circulating online, and posts soon made it clear. These far-left activists had launched an active manhunt for me across Hamburg. When I found out what had happened to Mark and realized what was unfolding, I flipped my shirt inside out and rushed into a bike shop, trying to buy a helmet, while masked individuals searched the streets and alleys for me. My phone wasn't working properly, so I begged the shop owner to call a taxi. When it finally arrived, I dove into the back seat and told the driver to go, fast. Lying low in the cab, I got more news. Another young journalist had been badly beaten, simply for being in the background of the same photo. It sounds the same, but there's still footage of both attacks online today. I felt a wave of guilt. I put others at risk, not just because of a shirt, but because of who I was. Seeing what happened to people simply seemed with me. I couldn't stop imagining what might have happened if Black Bloc had actually caught me. I got out, but it was clear that if I wanted to avoid getting seriously hurt, my time covering riots in Europe was over. It was a relief to leave Europe for a while, especially as attention shifted to the riots erupting in America. The 2017 free speech protests at Berkeley stood out to me. I was even invited to speak at one. These events were essentially a provocation. We support free speech rallies designed to trigger unhinged responses from Berkeley activists. When fights inevitably broke out, it proved the point. They didn't support free speech. That was the early right-wing formula. Honestly, the whole movement might have fizzled out if far-left activists just took a nap instead of showing up in ski masks with cardboard slogans. To be fair, the Antifa protesters looked just as hyped to gear up for their own political street brawl as the right-wingers were. This wasn't typical rioting, no towns burning or police stations under siege. It was two opposing factions showing up in absurd costumes for what was essentially a giant LARP. Only instead of guys in Spirit Halloween wizard costumes lobbing beanbags and screaming lightning bolt, it was black bloc rioters blasting heavy bass, swinging shields and batons, while the right came dressed like Captain America or Roman gladiators. In short, it was completely ridiculous, some of the funniest shit I've ever seen. I watched guys in helmets draped in American flag capes wielding plastic shields, charge into crowds of black-clad figures who looked like extras from a dystopian comic book. Gavin McInnes had sent a few members of his group, the Proud Boys, to watch my back. I didn't know much about them at the time, but they did manage to swat away a few flying fists. Apparently, they're now a designated terrorist entity in Canada, which makes for an interesting footnote to the time they helped me not get punched in the face. I don't know the exact reason behind it. All I know is that somehow the group across the aisle, Antifa, never got the same designation. This even though I've seen them smash a man's head open with a bike block right beside me. Blood streamed down his face as people scrambled to give medical aid. Things were getting gnarly until the mass crowd made one fatal mistake. They hurled smoke bombs without realizing the wind was blowing straight back at them. As the explosives went off, a strange quiet fell over the street. Then, as the smoke drifted into their ranks, the right-wing crowd erupted into laughter and surged forward with manic fervor. I followed the crowd as it advanced, observing a group of men on the right-wing side who had clearly come prepared for a fight. You could tell they had been practicing. One man struck a girl with dreadlocks in what looked like a knockout punch. Another wielded a giant pot of spaghetti and used a large pasta server to hurl it over the Antifa members on the ground. Figures clad in black ran and screamed, tripping over fences and tossing skateboards and bricks behind them in a desperate bid to slow the advancing crowd. Mace filled the air, and honestly, it was a miracle no one died. Luckily, I'd grown used to the chaos of riots and came prepared, with a helmet, goggles, and a gas mask. All of it came in handy as explosives bounced off my head and it coughed through clouds of pepper spray, live streaming the whole thing to thousands of views who turned in for the ride. It's amusing to think about the number of people on both sides who must reflect on that day with confusion. What were we all doing and to what end? Berkeley, like every riot I covered, made for an exhilarating story, but looking back, I'm not sure it changed anything for the better. It was a political theater. WWE and gas mask, if anything, it felt like another brick in the wall of our digital prison, where politics became live streams, costumes, and chaos with no real conversation or community. You can't think for yourself when you're living everywhere but the present, involved in everything but your own life. In hindsight, the flood of content put online may have only fed the crisis I now see everywhere: addiction to media-driven distraction. The only real change we can make is in our own lives, and back then, I was running from mine. I lived out of a suitcase. Never still, never home. People criticized me online, but one comment hit harder than the rest. Lauren isn't even a nationalist. She doesn't stay in one country for more than a month. It upset me because it was true, especially as I gallivanted around pretending to be some kind of savior of Western tradition. The truth was I had no community or tradition to protect. Maybe that's why I really do remember these moments least of all. The moments where I've traveled the world, got millions of views, watched men go up in flames, lives destroyed, careers launched, and cities thrown into turmoil. Nothing really stuck in those times because there was no depth to it. Never saw those places again. I wasn't thinking about the future or past, only the next flight, the next video, the next hit. All that mattered was keeping my foot on the gas. Alright, so if we're talking about being yourself here, right? That was the end of the chapter, by the way. That was the end of chapter 7. I'm on chapter 8 now. If we're talking about her, is she being herself right now? She would probably say no, right? Before 19, she was being herself, or at least she wanted to. She wanted to like do this, do that, be rebellious, and all that. After 19, she got instant fame from something, and she wanted to continue pursuing that fame as her career as well. And that, along the pursuit, she got success, and then during success, she realizes, oh wait a second, who am I? And then now she's in an existential crisis, as someone pointed out, because she doesn't even know what she's doing. She's just there to like do the process. She has her own, what do you call it, modus operandi, her own mode of operation, and she doesn't even know what it's for either. She's just doing it now. Like, damn. Is that being yourself, or is that really? Did she change though? You see, now we get into the be yourself conversation, something that I'll talk about later on, and I'll do it for now because my throat is so dry, dude. Oh damn, my throat is so dry. Hey, if you're still listening to this right now, why are you listening to this? You're listening to this as in your ear.